if we start. So welcome everybody to the first official PCPSI webinar. It's Mary here in the PCPSI office with Dan. So you're all very welcome, and thanks everyone so much for joining. We're really excited that we have Stephen Hoskinson on the webinar tonight as our first host. Thanks so much to Steve for joining us all the way from San Diego. And to most of you on the call, he probably needs very little introduction. I'm sure most of you know who he is, but he is the president of Hoskinson Consulting, and he's the founder, CEO, and I've never heard this term before, Chief Compassion Officer, that's CCO, of Organic Intelligence and the Organic Intelligence Outreach Institute. Based on the Organic Intelligence, Steve developed the Human Empowered and Resilience Training, also known as HEART training, and it's a positive psychology fractal method to resolve devastating effects of stress, trauma, and PTSD. Over the last 20 years, Steve has trained thousands of therapists, body workers, and social workers all around the world in the art of trauma resolution. We're also delighted that Steve is coming to Ireland very soon. On March 15th and 16th, he will be doing a seminar in Cork, and on March 19th and 21st, he'll be from 19th to 21st, he'll be on Dublin, and there's more information on both of those on our website, PCPSI. So I'll quickly hand over to Steve now, and thanks again for joining.
Hey, thank you so much, Mary, and yeah. And let's see. I just want to make sure that my screen is fine as is.
Yeah, looks good.
Yep, great. Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining me. And we were just talking before coming on, and I am in San Diego, but we're having nice Irish weather here. So we're very excited that it would be cloudy and rain's coming. So I know that's not what you want to hear from a person in San Diego. You know, but here we are, and thank you to PCPSI for inviting me, and just really jazzed to be a part of your program, and all. I don't know if I'm sure that if you're watching this this webinar, you're familiar with the amazing options of resources and education that PCPSI is offering. And the quality of programming, quality of staffing, you guys are amazing. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. And yeah, people may be familiar with myself and Organic Intelligence. You know, recently I was in Dublin, or I guess actually I was in Belfast for the trauma summit there, and presented alongside of the trauma luminaries. These are the of course the celebrities of trauma, you know, Dan Siegel, Bessel van der Kolk, and all the rest. And so I just am really happy to continue my connection with Irish training and the culture there in Ireland. So thank you again for inviting me back. And the part of the reason that I particularly like to work here is that, you know, the approach that I'm taking is not what you would think of as a literal approach. It's more of a it's a scientific approach, but it comes in like a poetic form. So there is this scientific core underneath it, and complexity science, the science of the neurobiology, but there is a poetic quality to it, because organic intelligence basically just means adept listening, and listening for the poetry that's being spoken, because there's really good news in this trauma world. And the news is that your system, your client systems, they want to unfold. And so what I've managed to do is to figure out that they tend to unfold in a three-phase process. And it's basically an application of complexity science into the human nervous system and into change process. So, you know, the complexity science has been used by people, you know, with a lot of money, you know, like government organizations. If you're going to be tracking the bourses, you're going to be doing micro tradings, or if you have to track traffic patterns or so on. But this is an approach then that needs to be applied to all complex systems, because complex systems are now being mapped and pretty well understood. The scientists of psychology and neurobiology and physics and even anthropology are all beginning to speak to each other. And we're understanding so much better how complex systems shift from phase to phase, and that there are reliable ways of understanding those phases. So I'm going to talk a little bit today to give you some ideas about how that happens, because in our work and clinical work, attunement is especially important. And attunement has been spoken of primarily from the lens of emotion and primarily from the lens of psychotherapy and to this moment. But what we need to do is really begin to think of attunement not only from the psychological standpoint or specifically an emotional standpoint, but also from the biological standpoint. And for that, then, we have to understand the major phases of the way that the human neurobiology functions, and that's my specialty, and that's what I have trained people in for 20 years. I've trained thousands and thousands of people internationally in this. And this is really an innovation in the process. I've taught for other organizations for quite some time, and whether we'll look at attunement from the standpoint, especially of this process that I've trained people in, and that's this three-phase model of working, because systems and complex systems are showing up in various specific stages and phases of organization. And another way to say that is levels of integration or levels of affect regulation. And to be able to map those dimensions very clearly into a scientifically established model is really key, because your human biology and mine is a complex system. And so what I hope to do is through a little bit of prose, a little bit of science, a little bit of poetry, and some storytelling, really give you the story of complexity science in step-by-step bites, really digestible bites, so that you can work well with humans and begin to see the success that we're having. Because we're not just talking about what is relatively, more straightforward, which is, say, the work with like a panic disorder or anxiety or depression, but we're talking about the fundaments of the way that the human biology is organized and disorganized. So there is a specific three-phase model that we're going to track people in, and if we're going to attune to people, we have to recognize what vehicle they're in. When a person comes into our office, are they in the chaos mobile? Are they in the resilience vehicle? Or are they in the sports car of prosilience? And all of those are really three different phases, three different terms for the three phases of how systems organize. And then what's really important is we begin to see and understand how systems shift from one to the other. So in the training, when I'm coming in like in Cork, March 15, 16, and then Dublin, March 19 through 21st, I'm going to give you tools for being able to work with this and to be able to see how these phases work, because each phase is clinically observable. And there are really clear and observable signs to this. And I'm going to hand those over to you as rapidly as I can. The way that I'd like to start today, though, is I want to share my screen with you so that you can see the end result. Mary was kind enough to read the description that we have, and that description is of organic intelligence as a implicit exposure model, is a fractal model. And so I'll tell you all of what that means, but part of what it means is the end of trauma therapy as we know it, because it's not necessary. It is absolutely not necessary and mostly contraindicated to think that we are processing trauma. We're so psychologically, I want to say sort of brainwashed, but we are so psychologically brainwashed that, that we've lost track of where it all starts. Like if we're going to be attuning to the person, I would suggest it begins right from the foundation of the physiology. And so I bring out what I call the ISOMA map. And ISOMA is an acronym that stands for image, sensation, orientation, meaning, and affect. And we need to recognize, in particular, that our system, your client's systems, are wanting to reorganize. But there is an issue that we have to deal with first, which is that the biology has a priority. And that priority, the agenda of that priority, the agenda that prioritized is don't die. So we know this, right? Like the biology is really interested in survival. And so, you know, fortunately, you know, we've been more educated in survival programs, those emergency programs, fight, flight, and freeze. But we are thinking, oh, there are all of these strategies for ways of helping people, you know, process trauma or discharge their fight, flight, or freeze, or complete these processes, or, you know, through prolonged exposure, have diminished reactivity, or work within the window of tolerance, and all of that. But really, in order to understand attunement, we have to begin with the idea of these three-phase models, this three-phase complexity model, and understand that the biology doesn't actually really want to change in a way. Like its first agenda is stability. Because if you have a system that is not stable, that system could then lead toward disintegration or system failure, which for a biological system like you and me, that is death. And so there are myriads of ways that our systems are redundant and really meant to keep our systems stable. And that stability is a value so the system doesn't fall apart. You would think, oh, the system wants to grow, and it does, but that's not the first agenda. The first agenda isn't improvement. The first agenda is not falling apart. So stability, we have to understand that the system is going to reinforce the systems that provide stability. So that's our first recognition, because we're going to look at this ISOMA map, image, sensation, orientation, meaning, and affect, but we're going to have to look at it in a particular way, because everybody, you know, depending on what your understanding of how, you know, healing happens, then based on that understanding, you'll try to work. So in image, for instance, in the image channel, if you're working in hypnosis, if you're working in the imagery work and eidetic imagery, then you're saying, okay, now we're going to get to this processing through image, and people will give you protocols and examples of how you can use image and imagination and image to be able to heal trauma. You're thinking of a resource, you're anchoring resources, or if you're working in sensation, say in somatic experiencing or sensory motor or Hakomi or others, you're saying, okay, now you need to track sensation, and that sensation is the important channel to be able to process those patterns. Or if you're a cognitive therapist, you're looking at the meanings, you're looking at the cognitions and saying, okay, we need to shape up our cognitions in order to work well and work with the cognitions that create that reactivity or so on. Or affect, I'm looking at the ISOMA model now. If you're a therapist that is working in emotionally focused therapy, or most of us who are trained as therapists are trained to look at the emotions, understand the emotions, and be able to support our affect regulation and emotion. All of those things are relevant to some extent, but they have to have an intelligent framework. And the framework has to understand that the biology prioritizes and reinforces one's behaviors and productions and sends up into all of these ISOMA channels information that will reinforce the status quo. So in image, in sensation, meaning, and affect, mostly those channels are going to send information that allows for and reinforces things to stay stable. That is, not change. That's also staying stuck. And at the same time, the good news is this, that your system and mine wants to recalibrate, rebalance, reorganize, grow its bandwidth, grow its range of resiliency. And just a hint, most of what we've been doing is far too intense. So in the way that we're working in organic intelligence, we are going to listen into the image channel. We're going to listen into the sensation channel. We're going to listen to the cognitions in the conversation. We're going to watch the person's behavior. We're going to really feel into and join with and attend to the emotions. And in all of those, we are listening for one thing. We are observing and watching for one thing: the subtle and inevitable signs from your client's biology and from your biology that, if integrated, if perceived, if registered, even non-consciously, will be the signals that are organizing again for that system. And so there is a whole developmental process in this three-phase model to get to that point where the system becomes truly self-organizing. But just know that that's also what the system wants. But most of these channels, image, sensation, meaning, and affect, most of these channels are constantly aiming to keep the status quo. And so people think, oh, now I'm gonna go to this therapist and it's gonna get so much better. And then they go in there and they work for a while and things get a bit better. That's fine. We expect that we can gain facility by working in a more positive psychological approach and using all the tools we know. And that's incremental or like quantitative change. I'm not really after quantitative change per se. I'm after the quantitative change that establishes the conditions then for qualitative system shifting. That is, not just getting a little bit better in the way that we're working, but we are dramatically changing and seeing how the system wants to process information in a more complex fashion and in a way that has much more bandwidth. So it's like if you have, you know, like in university or, you know, in your graduate school, you might be living in a small place, you're in debt, and you're stacking your books and everything on blocks and boards, and you're stacking that up to the roof. You can make things more efficient and you can have things more organized. And that's most of what happens in psychology. What we're proposing is move out of the dorm, get a bigger apartment. And in that bigger apartment, then you have more room for parties and having friends over and so on, right? You can have more fun and you can have more complex processing. We're supposing, and this should make sense, right? That our system doesn't just want to stay the same and get incrementally better, but our system is a self-organizing system that will grow its capacity and grow its bandwidth altogether. So that's really the punchline, is that your system wants to grow, but most of what we've been doing has been being confused about the way that the system wants to grow itself, and has done far too much intensity, and that excessive intensity will, in the end, get the person right back where they started in terms of actual system shift. So I think what I want to do now is just shift gears. I'm going to take your questions here at the end, but in the meantime, I want to show you a video of a session. And it gets back to the notion of this fractal work and also implicit exposure. The thing that the system is looking for is it is looking for its ideal intensity threshold. It's looking for the intensity, the metabolic intensity, not just emotional intensity or cognitive intensity. All of that registers, but it's physiological. So we're looking for the physiological intensity threshold that is the ideal intensity threshold that will be like the thermostat that then creates the pattern of self-organizing in the biology. And so if you're able to support the system in stabilizing in the right way, it will stabilize and then it will accelerate itself up to that key threshold and then come off of it. And that ideal intensity threshold is our ideal physiological learning threshold. And it's just like training. It's like lifting that, you know, that 5 kilo dumbbell, and then the little training effect happens, and then it's ready for the 7 kilo, and then the 10 kilo with rest in between. And there is a growth in ability, the growth in strength, which is the growth of bandwidth. And that means more complexity is possible to be processed. So that's the name of our game. And we have a whole clinical process that is dedicated to that. Now, so let me show you this video, because I want to show you how this works, and just how not trauma we're working. I was working in our heart training, the human empowerment and resiliency training. It was in Hawaii, and so we were working there, and I was working with a person. I was just talking with Sabrina earlier today, actually. I was working with Sabrina, and this is the end result. This is phase 3 work. It takes significant preparation along the way to get that phase 3 work to happen. So what I'm going to do something a little counterintuitive, which is I'm going to show you the end result. But the end result, as you might expect, is pretty sophisticated, and it physiologically, and then it hinges on all the preparation, all the preparatory steps that we have really well lined out in our training, and that, you know, I'll be handing over to you in March. Also, if you can be with us in Cork and in Dublin. So so here, yeah, that's right. I'll be checking chats also. So thanks, Mary, to let people know that we can bring comments in, and then I'll answer questions also at the end. So in this session with Sabrina, I'm just debating on, let me just share my screen with you. I'm just going to show you this. It's in part of our training courses. So you'll see me commenting on it. I think it was in a previous webinar. So let me show you. I'm just going to screen share here and begin to show you some of our stuff. All right. Here's our screen share. I'm going to close this. This is just a little preview of coming attractions. This is our 3-phase model. And so we'll see this really mapped out well. But in this phase, chaos, then in this phase, the system is really left to try to control itself by being out of control, or contrary to that, over-controlling. This is where you see the developmental disturbances, a lot of dissociation, where fight, flight, and freeze really has disorganized the system, and there is erratic modulation, affect regulation, and significant disorientation. People don't know, it's very difficult for people to form relationships here, as you would expect, and it's very difficult for people to find the right help because of this disorientation. And we have, again, a specific protocol for helping on this, but it involves a lot of joining, a lot of attunement right here, and a lot of positive reinforcement and unconditional positive regard, all the good things that we think about in therapy. But then the system will shift into, with the right support here, the person will begin to orient towards skills that are actually going to be stabilizing for them. And many of them we're aware of. This is the field of resiliency. This is the field mostly of psychotherapy as well these days, and includes things like cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, the nonviolent communication, the ability to focus attention, even medical and medicines. The interventions of medications are useful here. There's a lot of ego strengthening, normalization, and stabilization that's happening here. And it brings about a sense of agency and control and self-regulation from the standpoint of how I can get my system to operate better and feel really continually confident in my ability not to freak out on a regular basis. And in the meantime, in addition to all of those tools that we are most familiar with, then there are going to be these OI tools that are particularly tuned to what the biology wants and how the biology itself would begin to self-organize. And these skills then will lead toward the phase 3 process, what I'm calling prosilience, not just the ability to bounce back, which is resilience in the resilience field, but prosilience, to spring forward, to move into a life that has meaning and purpose, and where there is joy and the experience of contact and connection that really is then the fuel for my expression of my art of living on the planet, and the experience of compassion that overflows from the abundance of goodness in the experience of my own life. So that movement toward phase 3 is our end game, and that's really where the system itself becomes self-organizing. And by the systems repeatedly finding and being reminded of its thresholds of transformation, then the system begins to really become self-organizing from the biological standpoint, not self-regulating from the standpoint of ego regulation, ego strengthening, which is still a good idea. Okay, so I'm gonna look now at our video if I can. I'll show you this. Oh, this is, by the way, this is our website, organicintelligence.org. And we have an end of trauma course, and just to let you know, this is primarily for self-experience and experiential understanding of organic intelligence. So that's really for personal development as opposed to clinical development. And here's the session that I wanted you to see. Here's Sabrina. I'm not gonna, let's see. Yeah, I'm just gonna play this so you can get a taste for how this works. And I'm narrating in the midst of this. So fractal just means self-similarity or reiteration. So I'm here in San Diego telling you about this video where I am on a video describing what's happening in a video. That's about as fractal as you can get. Let's take a look.
How this happens. We're gonna be talking about, in this class, we're talking about natural disasters and the work with natural disasters, and Sabrina had been through several of those, and she's talking about one in particular that I wanted to bring to you because I want you to see something pretty special about how this works. Okay, all right. She's talking about the earthquake in San Francisco, actually, when she was there.
Freeway collapsing.
Right.
And then I think I told her I was babysitting. I was a nanny for these 2 little boys and the mom, and they all lived in Berkeley. And she called me and said, "I need my kids." And I'm like, "Come and get them. I'm not leaving." And I didn't, because they told us not to leave and not to go on a freeway. So,
Of course.
So I have to honestly say that one was really, the feeling of it gave me a lot of fear because it felt like not safe. Like,
sure.
And but it wasn't the worst of all 3 of them because I was in my home. I had my family there. My children were there. And but it was the only one that there was a loss of life. I remember after that we would always, I had to go into Berkeley. I was going to school in Berkeley. And
what kind of school? Okay. So there we have this, and this is completely typical. She says it's not the worst. Therapists are probably trained to go, "Oh, what was the worst?" No, not in organic intelligence. Where she's giving us and telling us, "Oh, that's not the worst." That's pointing us to the one that we want to focus on. But she says, "Oh, there was this, there was a shaking, but I had my house." Fast forward now about 10 minutes. 10 minutes, 16.
By the way, Sabrina worked hard on her
fast forward
stuff here.
When your system, like Sabrina's, is more established in phase 3, then you see this fractal reiteration. And this is what I want you to see. Pleasanton, What a great name, first of all, and pleasant. And let's see, back
A little
this up
story
just a
about
little bit.
And they had this institute in the Pleasanton area, and then they had the main institute in Berkeley, and that was in 1989, right when that earthquake happened, and it was probably in my life, it was the start of really, really blue experience. I loved Pleasanton. I loved it. It's one of my.
Right, you see how the blossoming of blue is happening here. I love Pleasanton, and just the name itself, right? Pleasant. How great is that? Why? Classic OI question. She says, "Oh, I love that. That's so blue." Question is, "Oh, good how? Blue how?"
See, it makes me feel emotional.
You see, the intensity comes up on the blue wave. See, the emotion comes through, and so the arousal cycle comes up, but it's riding the positive affect, not the trauma. It's riding the blue wave.
It's pretty.
Yes, yeah. I've been there. Yeah, I know.
I felt like I was at home.
Felt like you're at home. You're not just like with Jada, mommy and daddy and Julia and Jacob, just like at home. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I mentioned Jada. Check out the jadavideo.com, the Jada, J-A-D-A, the jadavideo.com, and then you'll see another example of when I was working with a traumatic event with my 3-year-old daughter, who is now 11. She'll turn 12 in April.
Before Pleasanton, so that was in 19. So my son, so it was almost.
Yeah. Is it okay to hang out with that feeling?
Oh, absolutely.
Sort of let yourself mold on like being home, Pleasanton. Now we're stabilizing those blue, reiterating, letting that network really reverberate its organizing information, right? That's the organizing information. Home. She named it previously, right? Oh, because, yeah, this earthquake was happening, but I was at home. And here it comes again, that fractal reiteration. So we're gonna reinforce that by letting that network reiterate the information that's going to be organized. A great name, first of all, and pleasant. And
A little storybook. They have the cutest little houses with all the flowers. You know, California has so many flowers.
Yeah. Another positive association.
It kind of that's really great. The trees, all the beautiful trees, and
yeah. I wonder if you'd be willing just to call up some images of that. Just
well, I was
like a photo book.
Well, so
yeah, go ahead.
So when I first moved there, the two things that I did was I had just had my son and I didn't want to work out. So I had a paper route, which I threw 300 papers, and I used to stick him in the back of the trunk of my car and open the thing down. And then I also was a nanny for these 2 little girls, and they lived on Golden Street, and they were the cutest little girls. And so we kind of that was what my life was. And then I did soccer. So everything that I
What do you mean you did soccer?
I played soccer.
You played soccer?
Yeah, and during that period.
For whom?
I played on a team.
And again, this is reiterating these blues, right? I mean, this is played soccer. What? Sabrina's pretty amazing. I hope you meet her at a training where she's mentoring one day.
Los Lobos. It was a co-ed team, and it was just a Sunday pickup or Sunday. It was serious business.
Wow.
They played to win.
Oh yeah. What position were you playing?
I played striker in midfield.
Wow.
And it was co-ed, so half of the guys were all Hispanic guys and they had used to been in their younger days professional soccer players, and so their families used to get together. It was just this really great experience.
Oh, for sure.
So, anyways,
great. So, when you hear, the participation, we're just feeding back. Oh, for sure. What? Professional. Oh, that sounded so good. Awesome. That's amazing. Amazing time. So let's collect that a little bit, in a stabilizing blue sort of way. But let's do it in this way, where you sort of have almost like a mental picture book.
Okay.
Just flip through those, see a picture, and then feel your body in relationship to that, you know, like what feels good, and then flip to another picture, and you can describe that the picture if you want, or just go through, and just let yourself enjoy a little scenic flip through of the picture book of Pleasant.
Do you want me to describe it, or?
It's up to you. The main thing is that you have the experience. By the way, just you hear the languaging, right? The picture book of Pleasanton. I mean, that kind of sort of says it all, doesn't it? What?
I just had a nice time in there.
Did you get a picture?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at all sorts of different pictures.
Really? And body sensation when you get a picture?
Well, I mean, okay, so one of the biggest beautiful pictures was at Christmas time. The neighborhood, everybody. It's just really cool.
Right. And you see the affect coming up, like this is an arousal cycle coming up to new threshold. But it's because it was so beautiful. And that's how we like to work these thresholds, right? It's blue, but it's intense, right? There is intensity to that, but it's like beauty. It's being touched by beauty and the time and the nostalgia. It's a very, very positive experience. This is trauma work. This is organic intelligence. So cool, in fact, that the feeling is very sweet, right? It brings tears. It's really moving. Yeah. Again, our job here is enjoyment, and just take your time to really let this pleasure reach you, and to sense some of that in the body also, so that we don't miss it. Yeah. So we get to digest the experience a little bit, the pleasure, the pleasantness.
You live in California. You know, when they have Santa in his swim shorts.
Yeah, right, in the swimsuit and stuff, and it's like surfing Santa or something. Yeah.
It's fun.
Totally.
We live near a creek, and we also live near a train, and so I always get fond memories when I hear train, because the train literally was from like this bar. It's like right in my bedroom. And you could literally be on the phone and they'd go, okay, hang on a minute. Because we used to have.
Did you see that shaking right there? I'll bring your attention to it again, but right there was that shaking.
Wall
See
phones?
that shaking?
The wall.
Sure. See that shaking?
A lot.
Remember where we saw that shaking gesture before? Earthquake. Right? Train goes by.
Whole house would vibrate.
Sure. Whole house would vibrate. Yeah.
It was so fun. I mean, it was. I just really
cool. So let's just do that one, for instance. And, on the phone, and it's like, and then train goes by, and you see how I am communicating that, right? I am pinging specifically that associative network by making the same gesture. Train goes by, it's that shaking. She is processing her earthquake right now, but unconsciously, right? Consciously, I'm in the house, I'm on the phone. That's how this works. That's the implicit processing that comes around. When you get phase 3, that system will process cycle after cycle implicitly. Ultimately, we would probably go directly to the event itself, but that's basically, by that time, it's all over but the shouting. We've already processed so much of this by working first through these naturally occurring implicit cycles. I'm aware of that, I'm tracking that, that's my job. My job is also to keep it implicit, but allow that experience to be full so it reaches its threshold and then deactivates. It's just sort of how homey that was, right? just get a sense of that. Oh, here's the vibration, and it's just, like, this is my home.
It is
My train.
It's my hometown. So I haven't. It's not where I was born, but it's my hometown.
Yeah.
That's what's on my.
Right? Okay. It's my hometown. All right. So this is something then, right? This is where we go with organic intelligence. We help people find home. Home in the body, home within oneself, home in an integrated experience. So I hope you begin to see that. This is a remarkable shift in the way we understand what healing looks like.
All right, I'm going to end our screen share here and then get to the Q&A with you here. And so I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. And just to say, you know, that we'll look at all of these dimensions when I'm coming in, and we'll have some like handouts, plus a fridge magnets that say the main message. The job is enjoyment, and the job is enjoyment because of the negativity bias and this, what I call the what's wrong intention. And our system is disordered by that. And so as a counterbalance to that yang, this is the yin of enjoyment. So more on that, it's what your system wants to do, which is super. And then I'd like to get to some of your questions, including your Q&A area. I'm looking to the, one other thing is that, remember that she was saying, oh, I was in Pleasanton, I was in my home, I was on the phone, and then there, you know, the train would go by and the whole house was shaking. That's the poetry. You know, the prose or the self-help version is, oh, the house was shaking, it was an earthquake, I was there with those kids and it was scaring the daylights out of me. The poetry is, I'm on the phone with a friend and my kids are there and that's my train going by and the house is shaking just a minute. And that's a completely different context, but it is processing the arousal. And that's the key. The system is using that story to bring up the arousal to new threshold and grow its capacity. And that's really the difference I'm trying to suggest. The end of trauma means we should stop traumatizing our clients as quickly as possible and in a very attuned fashion so that we can actually help them more. Nutritional, functional, Andrea, I'm reading your thing. Yep, the story, yeah, the bodies are telling the stories. Yeah, that high sensitivity is a thing, isn't it? Integration of mind and the body, yes, indeed. Yeah, yep. Right. So yeah, we're limited in our approach. It's his nonlinear process where a client may reach phase 3, but then again may, because of life events or memory recall, be in phase 2. Carrie, this is so key because these phases are pretty stable. Remember, the biology likes stability. So once you get into a phase, it stays stable. Now you can have upset. You can have things that are too intense. But in a system that's phase 3, all of those skills that got you there are going to be ready, and they're going to be ready to reinstitute and then get the system back into phase 3. So yes, the system can be compromised. There can be gross trauma and so on. But in the end, the systems are pretty stable. Once they get into that periodic rhythmic process, the system has learned the skills and wants to stay stable at that level and won't want to really backslide in that way. So thank you for your question. I'm going to bring up the other Q&A areas. Camilla, curious about thoughts on suicidal ideation from the organic intelligence perspective. Well, it's a great point because we're talking about self-regulation or biological self-regulation. That is when the system itself begins to grow, and that is when we as therapists begin to take a more hands-off approach because the system is self-organizing, and that self-organizational process is so complex that really what we can do or what the client will do will mostly interfere with what the biology has evolved to do over 1 million years, which is have all of these systems and subsystems, the frequency of amygdala functioning and the hypothalamus and the respiration and all of our, cardiac systems and, all of those systems of homeostasis are interlinked and interwoven. And so that's not something I can do. All I can do is recognize how the system itself is trying to do that and support that trend and then get out of the way. With a person who is having, really problematic suicidal ideation, that's not a phase 3 situation, that's a phase 1 situation. In phase 1, I'm having to be much more involved because I'm holding something for that client that they don't know, which is that they're not broken. Their system will and can reorganize much more than they expected. That is, so many people who have experienced radical trauma and having, they think they're broken. They think they're beyond repair and beyond help. And they think, oh, all my troubles and all of my issues are going to be too much for you. And so what I hold for them something in particular, which is I hold the understanding that their system knows how to get out of this and improve. And that means that I know that they don't know how to do it, and I know that I don't know how to do it. So we are partners in that process. And the thing that I hold is I know that their system has the key to unlock their future. And both of us are going to join together and expectantly work to see that coming around. And in phase 1, I have to be pretty interventionist and I have to be pretty active. There are many. I think James Hillman talked about suicide and suicidal ideation and psychological processes and that. In particular, from a biological standpoint, what we're looking at is one, traumatic repetition. You have to think about intergenerational family fractals, that is intergenerational themes. You have to think of what we often think of as like internalized oppression, where systems are acting out impulses from civilization, rejection, and impulses of elimination, or Holocaust and so on. And then we have to recognize that also suicidal ideation is going to probably arise from a system that has phase 1, also a good bit of freeze in it. Freeze is the system of immobility and the dissociation, or what Stephen Porges calls the dorsal vagal system. And that is immobility, but it is a deadening and deadened type state. And so people often feel like, oh, if I could just, sort of get some kind of congruency here, I would feel better. It'd be better in a way. People can handle suffering pretty well as long as they feel like it's not the same suffering. If they feel like things are moving, and even if it's slow progression, that is so much better than being stuck and feeling stuck. And it's partly because the self-reinforcing information from the freeze system in particular says this to the person, and then it comes into their mind and they believe it, which is, it's always been like this, it's always going to stay like this. And so that helplessness, hopelessness is actually the way that freeze system keeps itself stable. It keeps itself self-reinforcing by messages like that. So we train people to get perspective on thoughts in particular, and then we help people really come out of freeze by working through image, especially working with dreams, and then counterbalancing that with a whole host of other interventions. And then we work to keep people alive and stay in the game. One of the things that we say a lot, especially for those of you who may be on this and who feel sensitive, don't give up. You are the canaries in the coal mine. Given how things are going in this world, and here I am in Trump land, in the United States, given how things are going right now, we should be feeling in distress. We should probably be walking with a tear coming down our cheek at all times, with a broken heart, for how the planetary system is going. Our ecosystem is, in disintegration, social systems in disintegration, political systems in disintegration. So if you're just feeling okay and not really aware of and emotionally connected to the tragedy of this moment, then that's not healthy. And so we make room for people to have sincere distress about how things are going, and otherwise we are just kind of zombies, right? So let's not do that. Deirdre, how many therapy sessions would organic intelligence therapy normally take, I suppose, in comparison to other methods such as CBT? Well, we encourage people to get CBT. We like the DBT, CBTs, and all of these tools, but it really depends on how disorganized a system is. And if you're a therapist, you know this, that there is a whole range of disorganization, but it's not solely up to the disorganization. I've seen this, that sometimes people that are in more distress have a faster progress because the motivation is there. They're so motivated to really enact change and to make something different happen. They work hard and they make this happen, and they grow really rapidly. So how many sessions? Really, one of the most challenging syndromes that I work with, and one that is really difficult, one in California that we're dealing with, and all throughout the United States, we're having issues, it seems to me, with people who are using cannabis a lot. I am all for medical, relief and use of all kinds of helps and substances for that, and medications. But in terms of actually making progress toward integration, toward embodiment, and toward liberation, we're having a lot of issues here in that regard. And then the other challenging situation that I would just name here, because again, I'm saying, well, it depends on how disorganized the system is. There are, radical environmental conditions as well. If you're in a system that doesn't like you, or say, you are inferior because of, name your bias, color, or gender, or sexual orientation, and so on, that creates an unfriendly environment for you, and that's a challenge. And another challenge that you might not think of, this syndrome, which is the trust fund syndrome. The trust fund syndrome. So I've worked with people who are on trust funds and have a bunch of money and don't really have any necessity. There's no impingement from reality on them. They kind of got it made. So it is really hard to say, and in any given moment, I am not sure really who's gonna progress and accelerate through this. And what I would say is that this helps and it works, and that forever or never takes a really long time. So this compared to things that take forever, I mean, it's not like this is the cure-all. I'm not saying that. This is a really inclusive approach, but you really have to understand the way the biology works in order to work well with people, and to be able to work in a way that is this kind of support, where we're really empowering people with the understanding of the power and the intention, the loving intention from their own system for healing. It's a really pleasant way to work in a mindfulness frame. So I hope you're interested, and hope you'll show up. We're looking to get a training going here with PCPSI, and are looking to do that in Cork, and would love to have your participation in that. Mary, thank you also for inviting me here and having me be a part of your program.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was really, really interesting. I have no background in psychology, but I found it very interesting. Thank you. And I would like to remind everybody that we have those 2 upcoming seminars in Cork on the 15th and 16th of March, and Dublin on 19th and 20th. And we would like to offer everybody on the call a discount coupon for those. And the discount coupon is Stephen 18%. I'll type it into the chat now, and that's valid for the next few days. So if you would like to book in, please use that to avail of the discount. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks to you, Steve.
My pleasure. Thank you too.
Take care. Bye.
Have a good night, everybody. Ciao.